This lesson covers 1-4, solving absolute value equations. So if you remember, the absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So it's the distance from 0 on a number line, if that makes more sense to you. So if you think about it, can distance ever be a negative when we're talking about absolute values? No, right? So if you're talking about, here we go, 0, 1, 2, here's my number line, right? How far is -2 away from 0? What is the absolute value of -2? Well, it's 2, right? It's 2 spaces away. So even though -2 is negative, the distance it is from 0 on the number line is a +2. The absolute value of a number is always non-negative. That's what we just said, positive, right? Therefore, absolute value of x equals -5 is no solution because you cannot have just an absolute value equal to a negative number. That's not possible. Empty set, also called no solution, a 0 with a line through it, empty brackets. I usually prefer the 0 with a line through it or no solution. Sometimes if you write empty brackets, maybe you thought you forgot to put something in there. So you do whatever works for you. Extraneous solutions. What word do you see in the word extraneous? Extra, right? It's like extra answers, sort of. It's answers that are not solutions. You did nothing wrong in the problem, but it didn't work out. So you have to check your answers when it's absolute values. It's not an option. So before we actually do some of these, let's go ahead and put the steps to solving for absolute value inequalities on the back of your notes. There's a blank, it's blank on the back, so let's write these down. So steps to solve it. Number 1, get the absolute values alone. What I mean by that is, let's put an example here. If I have absolute value of x minus 7 plus 2 equals 40. The absolute values aren't alone yet. This plus 2 is in the way. So before I go on to step 2, I would subtract the 2 and then continue the problem. So if I had this, the absolute values are alone. I understand there's more than one thing inside of them, but that doesn't matter. As long as there's nothing on the outside or even like here, then it's alone. But if there's extra stuff, you have to get rid of it, and I'll show you how later. For step 2, you're going to set up 2 equations. One positive, one negative. I'll show you how to do that. Step 3, you're going to solve like normal, nothing new there. Step 4, you're going to check your solution or solutions. You have to, not an option. You could end up with something extraneous if you don't. So pause, take a minute, write it down, write some questions if you have any, and let's get started. All right, back to the notes on the front. Evaluate each expression if A is -3, B is -5, and C is 4.2. Remember, when it says evaluate, it means find your answer. You probably will not have any letters left over when you're done. If you have a letter, you probably did it wrong. Again, there's always exceptions to the rule, but evaluate is not the same as solve. That's important. So the first thing we need to do is substitute, right? So 2, absolute value of 4 times what's A, -3, minus 3 times C, 4.2. So you substitute first, and then you follow the order of operations, PEMDAS, to find the answer. So take your time, try to find it without me. You should get 49.2. I'm going to do the problem if you need help. If you don't, go on to the next question. So if you didn't understand that, order of operations is PEMDAS, so parentheses come first. Parentheses are really grouping symbols. These absolute values are grouping symbols. We have to do this first. So inside of this, we start all over again. We do PEMDAS again. None of these are true parentheses here. Those are really multiplication symbols. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply 4 times -3 and get -12. And -3 times 4.2 and get -12.6. You have to finish this problem before you can do anything else. What's -12 minus 12.6? -24.6. Now, what is the absolute value of negative 24.6? Well, if you remember, absolute value is always non-negative. It's positive 24.6. And you can finish the problem by multiplying by 2, which is going to be 49.2 when you're done. If you're confused, ask a question. Let's go to 23. Solve each equation. Again, go back to your notes from the back side to solve. Make sure the absolute values are alone before you go to step 2. Are the absolute values alone in our problem? Yes. The z minus 13, I don't care how much is inside the absolute values. You could have the whole alphabet in there if you wanted to. As long as nothing is on the outside, then you're fine. So now we're going to go to step 2. Set up 2 equations, one positive, one negative. So I always like to draw 2 arrows so I remember that I need to set up 2 equations. So the first one, you just write what you had before. Z minus 13 equals 21. On the second equation, the absolute value doesn't change. It's still z minus 13, but this time it's equal to the opposite. It's equal to negative 21. So from here, this should look pretty easy to you. It's just 2 Algebra 1 problems in the same question. So what do you do to solve for z here? Well, you're going to add 13, aren't you? So when you add 13 to 21, you can show plus 13, but at this point a lot of people can just kind of do that in their heads. If you're doing it in your head and you get it wrong, then show plus 13 on both sides. If you're getting it right, then that's fine. You can start doing shortcuts like that if you're ready for it. So what is 21 plus 13? 34, right? Same here. Add 13 to both sides, and what do we get for z? Negative 8. Here's where you have to check your answers. We just solved. You have to check to see if we created an extraneous solution. I have to go back to my original problem because one or both of these may not work. So let's go back to the original. So this time z is 34. Is the absolute value of 34 minus 13 21? So what is 34 minus 13? 21. What's the absolute value of 21? 21. It checks out, so that's one of our answers for sure. Let's check it with negative 8. I'm not going to write it down. You can if you need to. Negative 8 minus 13 is negative 21. The absolute value of negative 21 is 21. So yes, they are equal. So both of these answers worked. Negative 8 and 34 were correct. My final answer is right here. So that's the fancy way of writing it. This is in brackets and usually it goes smallest to largest. If you left it this way for now, that's completely acceptable, but eventually you need to start writing your answers properly. So this is the brackets, smaller to larger, or left to right, or whatever makes sense to you. If you're confused, pause it, look at this problem again, whatever works for you. 27. 5 absolute value of q plus 6 equals 20. Step 1, are the absolute values alone? No, they're not. That 5's in the way, right? What's the 5 doing to the absolute values? Why is it in the way? What's the problem? It's being multiplied, right? How do we undo the 5? Divide. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So I'm left with absolute value of q plus 6 equals what's 20 divided by 5? 4. So now, doesn't it look just like number 23 did? You set up your 2 equations. Q plus 6 doesn't change. It's still q plus 6. This first one's still equal to the 4. The second one is equal to the opposite, so negative 4. What would I do to finish this problem? Subtract the 6 from both sides. Minus 6 if you need to show that. So q is equal to negative 2. Good. On this problem, same thing. Minus 6. So q is equal to negative 10. We have to check them in the original problem. It's not an option. So to check it, you go back to the original. 5 absolute value. I'm going to go ahead and plug in negative 2 for q this time. So negative 2 plus 6. And see if it's equal to 20, the original question. Order of operations says the absolute values come first. Negative 2 plus 6 is 4. Absolute value of 4 is 4. Does 5 times 4 equal 20? Yes, it does. So q is negative 2 was correct, and it worked out. Now let's try the negative 10. You take a second, pause it, check negative 10 and see if it works. Did it work? Yes, it did. Let's check it together, right? 5, negative 10 plus 6, absolute values, equals 20. Negative 10 plus 6 is negative 4. Absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And that's 20 equals 20 again. So both worked. This answer is fine as long as you circle both of them, but this is a better answer. If you go smaller to larger, that would be negative 10, comma, negative 2. This is the best answer, I feel like. Okay, pause it again. Try number 33 without me. Just see if you can get started or at least get stuck. If you're still listening, I'm going to erase this stuff just because it's a little bit confusing to look at everything on one page, I feel like. I'm going to go ahead and put up the answer. If you get the answer right, great. Skip to number 41. If you get it wrong, you need to watch and see how to do it. So let's put the answer up. On 33, you're going to end up getting no solution. So if you didn't get it right, please continue to watch. Step 1, are the absolute values alone? No, they're not. What's in the way? This negative 3 is in the way, but so is the negative 12, right? We have to get rid of one of them first. It matters which one. Do you know which one we need to get rid of first, the negative 3 or the 12? Negative 12. If this problem said negative 3x minus 12 equals negative 6, you understand that I could pretend it said that in my head, right? I replaced this absolute value with an x, and I'll deal with it later. What would you do first there? You would add the 12 and divide by the negative 3, right? It's the same thing. You're going to do that again. You're going to add 12 to both sides. That goes away, right? So negative 3, absolute value 3t minus 2 equals what's negative 6 plus 12? Well, it's 6, right? Now what's in the way of the absolute values being alone? The negative 3. What's negative 3 doing to the absolute values? It's multiplying. What do we do to undo that? Divide. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I'm left with absolute value of 3t minus 2 equals, what's 6 divided by negative 3? Negative 2. Well, that's not a 2, is it? Negative 2. There we go. Do you notice anything weird? Most of you are probably already ahead of me and you're trying to draw your two equations and solve and all that good stuff, right? But can you ever have just an absolute value equal to a negative? No, you cannot. So once I got everything away from the outsides of them, I don't care how much is inside. Once you get an absolute value alone equal to a negative number, it's automatically no solution. Don't keep going. Don't waste your time. You're done. However, let's go ahead and finish it because a lot of times people don't think about it or they go too fast, or they go too far, they finish the problem, and let's show you what to do if that happens. So if you went ahead and kept going, that's fine. Go ahead and set up your two equations. You're going to get the 3t minus 2 equals something, and the 3t minus 2 equals something again. You write the first problem, no matter what it says, negative 2. You take the opposite, positive 2. And then you solve these two questions. So you would add 2, and you'd get 3t equals 0. Divide by 3, t is 0. That's okay. You can get 0 as an answer, right? We'll check it later. Add 2, so 3t equals 4. Divide by 3. Just leave it as 4/3 for right now. You don't need to worry about that, okay? But when we check it, you're going to find out that neither of these work. So let's check 0 first. If I check 0 in the original problem, negative 3, absolute value of 3 times 0 minus 2 minus the 12 equals negative 6. I just rewrote my original problem and I replaced t with a 0. Order of operations would tell me 3 times 0 is 0 minus 2. I just wrote everything else down. Just do one thing at a time, right? What's the absolute value of negative 2? Positive 2. Keep going. I'm going to scoot over here since I'm running. Actually, I'll go over here and erase it. Okay, so just ignore 41 for right now. So this is now negative 6 minus 12 equals negative 6. Well, what is negative 6 minus 12? Negative 18 equals negative 6. Is that true? No, it's not. So because that's not true, that one didn't work. Now let's try the 4/3 answer. I'm not going to take the time to actually do that one with you, but if you were to plug in 4/3, you're going to end up getting that the two equations don't equal each other again. So because neither of them ended up working, it's no solution. If you really need to see me work out that problem as well, you couldn't get it to work out for you, let me know and I'd be happy to help you in class. But for the sake of the video, we already know it was no solution from before, so if you really need to see that, just let me know. Again, go ahead and pause it if you need to copy that stuff down. I'm going to erase all of this because it's in our way, and then we'll do number 41. For number 41, are the absolute values alone? Technically, no, right? We need to go ahead and divide by that -1 in front. That -1 is being multiplied, so we have to divide. You can think of it that way if you want to, whatever works for you. We're going to divide by -1 here and divide by -1 here. Gone, right? What that means is it's going to change the sign everywhere over here. So you're left with -8z minus 20 equals absolute value of 2z plus 4. So now what do we do? You set up your two equations. Some people really don't like the absolute values over here. I'm going to go ahead and switch sides if that bothers you. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter, right? So no matter what, we've got the absolute values alone. So we set up our two equations, 2z plus 4 equals something, and 2z plus 4 equals something. That doesn't change. What does change is the right side on the right question. So I go ahead and write the -8z minus 20. And on the second question, it's going to be the opposite of everything. So it's going to be positive 8z plus 20. You're taking the opposite of everything. You're distributing a -1 everywhere. Pause it, finish this question, find z on the left, finish this question, find z on the right, and see if you get what I got. Don't check them yet, just go ahead and find the answers. For this left side, you should have gotten z equals -12 over 5, and on the right, you should get -8 over 3. If you did, go ahead and check your answers and see if they're right, and if you didn't, then watch me. I prefer to solve for the variable first, and I prefer to keep it positive if possible, so I'm going to go ahead and add 8z to both sides, getting 10z plus 4 equals -20. From there, you only have one option. You have to minus the 4 on both sides, right? So 10z equals 16. And then what? Oh, sorry. I just said, whoopsie. Minus the 4 would be -24. Sorry, I was looking at my other piece of paper. So -24. So now you divide by the 10. So z equals -24 over 10. However, you always, always, always reduce fractions. So go ahead and reduce that, and what do you get? -12 over 5. Okay, so we'll check that in a second. So on this one, again, I prefer to keep the z a positive, so I would have subtracted 2z from both sides, resulting in 4 equals 6z plus 20.